Good morning, or good afternoon, maybe. The title of this panel is What Long-Term Peace Requires Now, but I think we may also talk about a proposal for short-term peace, which has been very much talked about since yesterday. It's been the hot topic of this conference so far, and I'm sure our speakers will have something to say as well about this. So please you can already send your questions if you have on this Slido app already now. So Alexander Khara, I will turn to you first. This war, this full-scale war is soon entering its fourth year. What does Ukraine need to bolster its security, and what can realistically be achieved to this goal in the coming year, in your opinion?
Thank you. We have been fighting against Russians for 11 years, and it's full scale in the phase which is surpassing the time that the Soviet Union was fighting, and this artificially created great patriotic war thing. I don't see any signs of this conflict to be over anytime soon, even though I believe that the Russians may ask for a partial ceasefire, because we are targeting their energy infrastructure, which is one of the major sources of the hard currency, and certainly they're running their economy. But I do not believe in any peace plans have been proposed again and again with no single interest of Ukraine or Europe in them. The recent one is just like a capitulation list, and we don't need Americans or Europeans to capitulate for Russians. We can do it on ourselves. Certainly we are not going to do that. So what we need for security, and we cannot come up with any ideas that are not in existence. We have UN Security Charter, the Helsinki Final Act, we have NATO. There is no other mechanism how to ensure security of Ukraine, given that Russia is a major nuclear power, much larger in terms of resources and particularly demography. So there is no possibility for Ukraine to deter Russia in the future on its own. So that's why we have, let's say, like a plan. And we are fighting now, but we are developing our defense industry, we are developing our defense forces with the aim to inflict great pain on Russia, and in the future to be capable of deterring them by conventional means, and hopefully when we join the Euro-Atlantic Alliance, to deter Russia in Europe. And I believe it's really important to understand that in reality Russia is not threatened by NATO. The only thing that is threatening Russia is that there is no space they can invade or exert their influence to. Belarus is absorbed. They want to do the same thing with Ukraine. Unfortunately, Georgia now is a semi-colonial state. Moldova is vulnerable. So if all those states are in the European Union and NATO, I believe the Russians would turn back to their domestic problems and will try to make their life better, not to fight against their neighbors.
You mentioned Georgia. You say it's half a colonial state. Yeah. Do you think Europe has lost Georgia?
Oh, no, I don't think that. The Georgian society is against this course to be closer to Russia. But given the political dynamics, they cannot do anything about that. And actually, the time of the soft or velvet revolution has passed. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, the tyrannic forces are ready to use force. And we've seen it on the street of Georgia. We've seen how Lukashenko dismissed the protest against the forged elections. And the same thing happened in Russia. So you cannot protest the KGB guys that controls all the money, media, and military force with just lighters and the peaceful protests. So there should be something else behind that.
Thank you. Anna Wieslander, I will turn to you now. What kind of security guarantees? Europe has been talking a lot about those security guarantees and trying to work on those. So what kind of such measures will Ukraine require? And what can its allies bring to Ukraine, realistically?
Well, thank you so much for that question. Thanks for having me. It's great to be back here in Vilnius. Well, I want to start with perhaps broadening the question a little bit, since there are so many propositions floating around. And I want to start with what I consider to be the major risk before entering into the details of security guarantees. And the major risk, as I see it now, is that we are moving in a direction that we do not want, where Ukraine would end up decimated, and with this lack of sovereignty that has occurred in discussions, and as part of a Russian sphere of interest. And that would be absolutely devastating, not only for Ukraine, but for Europe as a whole. But there is a risk, and we have to see that when we are looking at these various components that are floating around, that we will enter this, some of us clear-eyed, perhaps some others will be sleepwalking, but this is a very dangerous direction that we have to look into. So why is this risk, I think, so urgent now? I think we have a difficult dynamic in this process where the US wants peace, Ukraine wants peace, Europe wants peace. We are open to indulge in peace discussions, while Russia is not. And that makes the whole process dynamics tilt into Russia's favor, into this direction, where Russia's long-term interest is not only to take Ukraine, but to divide Europe into spheres of interests. So this is how Ukraine's future affects the whole of Europe. Now, given the risk, there are also some components that are common. We have talked about trying to keep the transatlantic cooperation and unity in dealing with the future of Ukraine and how important that is. So I think it's important that we are in agreement that Ukraine should remain a sovereign state. That's absolutely bottom line. No capitulation, as you said, you don't need any help with that, but you need help to maintain and secure the sovereignty of Ukraine. And that's important for everyone. And the second part is, of course, that there is unity on the EU accession. It's supported by the US, and the EU has started that process, which is good, and it should continue. But in order to reach that, to maintain the Ukraine sovereignty and to reach the EU membership, I see three things, and this is what comes into security guarantees. We need to create that stable environment for Ukraine in order to reach those goals and to stabilize the future of Europe. And for that, Ukraine needs to have a strong army. That's, I would say, the first deterrent for anyone. It's about sovereignty, it's about holding your territory, it's about safeguarding your populations and your institutions, your democratic institutions. And if you don't do that, the Ukraine will not become a member of the EU either. So those things go together. So strong army integrated into Western defense industrial base is key and cannot be compromised. Secondly, the security guarantees. The coalition of the willing has been working in Europe for this. I don't have the details of how that plan looks, but I think the most important component here is that it has been led by the UK, or is led by the UK and France. It will involve European troops mostly, and that is a challenge for us, of course. Some say it's an uncomfortable risk, but I would argue that the risk is much greater if we do not involve in this, because it will have a clear signal and deterrence factor towards the EU, towards Russia. And I would have liked to see us perhaps doing more even now on that, an air defense shield or helping out with more visible troops on the ground in Ukraine. Already at this stage, I think would help deter in the future Russia. And of course, the US should be part of this. Worst case, if the US is not, Europe should still be working on a solution where Europe guarantees or is present in Ukraine to the extent that it's needed by Ukraine in order to maintain its sovereignty. So this is a very important point. And then my third point is that NATO door has to remain open. It is open now, as I see it. The North Atlantic Treaty has an open door policy. We have various writings, the irresistible path, irreversible path for Ukraine to join NATO. But there should be no new writings that close that door. I think at this stage, that's perhaps where we can reach a broad consensus and where we have to really signal. So those three components, because if we don't keep the door open to NATO, I think it will also be difficult for Ukraine to join the EU. Those things are connected. This is one European security structure, and we need to maintain the core components of that structure. So I believe there is it would be even better if we had a stronger alliance across the Atlantic on how to proceed with Ukraine and the peace talks. But there are some components that I think are important, the sovereignty aspect, to keep that, and the EU track. And then these three, a strong army, a European coalition of the willing, and an open door to NATO. If we can maintain that structure, I think we can move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, but this is exactly the opposite of... Your 3 points are totally contradictory with these, some of the points included in this 28-point plan. So we can...
That's why I'm pointing them out.
Absolutely. I think that was clear enough. Yeah. Thank you. Ambassador Ildem, President Zelensky visited Ankara a couple of days ago and had talks with President Erdogan. So can you tell us the role that Turkey could play in securing peace in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be back in Vilnius. And I think our discussion is a very timely one when there are so many speculations going around regarding the possible peace deal. Well, first of all, a few words on that, and I will pick up some of the points of Anna. We all want to see peace, to end this ongoing war, because the Ukrainian people are, with their heroic act, are the ones suffering. And it is for the European security as well. And we have to recognize that. First of all, any peace deal should follow the fundamental principles that underpin European security. They are enshrined in different documents, starting with UN Charter and the Helsinki Final Act and the founding documents of the OSCE. I agree that in recent years, the instruments of European security collapsed. But we should not revisit the fundamental principles that underpin European security. First and foremost, respect to sovereignty and independence and territorial integrity of countries, inviolability of international recognized borders, and also not to threaten other countries or threaten to use force. And one other issue related to keeping NATO's door open is for every country to be able to choose its security arrangements, whether to belong to an alliance or not. As I see the speculated draft or ideas floating around, they are corresponding to the expectations of Russia more than Ukraine. And therefore, we need to be absolutely clear in our messages to our American friends that they may be prioritizing pivoting to Asia-Pacific region, which is very understandable. But to fix this problem, which may equate to capitulation of Ukraine, would not solve the problem. We will have perhaps 2-3 years of relative calm, but I'm sure that Russia would regroup whatever capabilities that it has and choose to resort to another confrontation. So Ukraine should be at the table. But also the Europeans should be consulted, because whatever we are talking about Ukraine, these fundamental principles are related to European security. Russia also sees the ongoing conflict beyond Ukraine. That's why they tabled 2 draft treaties, one to NATO, one to United States, before the start of the war. So there is an interrelationship with the situation in Ukraine and the future of European security. Now, coming to my country's possible contribution, first of all, as you may all recall, Turkey hosted the first meetings of both sides, first in Antalya and then in Istanbul in 2022. It was a month after the war started. And this year only, we hosted 3 rounds of talks, direct talks with them. But Turkey was heavily involved in the preparation and also consultations, bilateral consultations with both Russia and Ukraine. Therefore, there is an accumulated record of individual positions that Turkey can make a contribution in the thinking. One other example is the grain deal that Turkey was instrumental together with the United Nations to come up with an arrangement for the food security. Turkey not only contributed by facilitating it, but also contribute to the operationalization of this arrangement by Regional Coordination Center in Istanbul. Therefore, with the exchange of prisoners arrangement, I can continue with all these elements. I think Turkey is one country that may contribute to the process. Sometimes there were misunderstandings regarding the stand of Turkey. It was more so in the past, less now. First of all, Turkey considers Ukraine as a strategic partner. For 13 years, we have expanded all our cooperation to different spheres, including defense industry. Russia, yes, we talk with Russia at the highest level. Not that we love Russia, but we need to consult and coordinate with them. They have been in different conflict areas that Turkey had presence. Even for deconflicting purposes, Turkey needed to coordinate and talk with them, like the United States was doing with Russia in Syria, for instance, for deconflicting purposes. Therefore, we would like to make our capacity available for any future talks. But in any case, Turkey is also sensitive about respect to these fundamental principles that underpin European security.
And also as a NATO member.
Yes.
John Foreman, there's been a lot of talk about how this conflict has transformed warfare. And yet, it's been also fought in a very traditional and 20th century way in some manners. Can you describe as an expert on military affairs, how this war has changed technologically, you know, the dynamics on the front line. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm just going to say, I don't think the war is going to be settled on the battlefield. I think it will be settled around a table. I think that I agree with the ambassador about Turkey's role. I disagree in some ways about the latest peace proposals, quote unquote. I think the key objective is to get Russia and Ukraine into substantive talks based on an agreed framework. So we're a long way from any agreement, but I think that if the Americans can speak to the Ukrainians and speak to the Russians to actually get people through the door, into the room, back into Istanbul, like they were in 2022, with 4 or 5 rounds and proper protocols, proper discussions, that's where we're heading. I think on warfare, I think every focus is too much on technology and the war. You know, the Colonel Boyd used to talk about people, ideas, machines in that order. And I think sometimes our sort of techno-fascination about drones or AI gets in the way of the fact that the war's being fought by Ukrainian soldiers, men and women on the front line. And, you know, we could give all the soldiers all the tech in the world. If they haven't got the right morale, the right leadership, the right training, then it's wasted. I also think that, you know, we must be careful extrapolating too much from the war in Ukraine, because it's fundamentally being fought without an air component. So the American-style aerospace battle is missing. The Ukrainian Air Force has done a sterling job to defend itself, Ukraine, but the Russian Air Force has basically not turned up and been used to deliver, you know, rockets into Ukrainian cities, missiles. But I think, you know, war is the mother of invention, like necessity. Ukraine's no different. And I think both sides have come a long way. You know, the Russian army today is the 3rd army they've been on, you know, because the 1st army was destroyed in 2022. The 2nd army, with the mobilization, they went in 23, 24. Now we're on the sort of hybrid, whatever, Mad Max army we've got in the Donbass fighting the Ukrainians. But I'll pull out three or four areas. So I think firstly, the nature of war hasn't changed. You know, it's bloody, it's human, it's one of the most human activities, it's visceral, it's about fear and emotion, it's incredibly human. I think the character of war may have changed in 3 ways. I mean, firstly, the cost-benefit of killing people has changed. You know, traditionally we've spent an awful lot of money just to kill one person. Now it's a lot cheaper to kill soldiers, and that's been shown as a price per kill as it's come down. I think secondly, you know, drones, as we're seeing in Ukraine, albeit without the air component, has eroded the front line. People say it's like World War I. It's nothing like World War I because there is no front line. It's just very fluid. And Mike Coffin was at dinner last night. He was speaking about this zone where nobody controls anything and nobody knows what they control in the sort of 50 kilometer from either 50 kilometers either side of the front line, 25 kilometers either side of the front line, which obviously, in particular for the army, is incredibly difficult. But how do you fight in those circumstances? And I think it's going to be true for any army. I think secondly, the AI dog has barked. We heard talk about AI legality. But it's not just now for drone targeting, but, you know, and target selection, routing for missiles, but also for reconnaissance, trying to analyze huge amounts of data and present it to decision makers, helping decision makers make decisions, and even, you know, use of facial recognition, whatever, for war crimes, you know, something I didn't anticipate 3 or 4 years ago. And I think one of the lessons for us, so for the British in the North Atlantic, is how we are going to fuse huge amounts of data using AI is going to be one way of doing it, as shown by Ukraine. I also think about the gamification. Again, people have talked about gamification, are using games design elements into the military context. I think it's extremely interesting how Ukraine has leveraged startups and grassroots private sector gamers into warfare, which I think will help, or will influence how we go about doing business as well. You know, giving points per kill to Ukrainian soldiers, incentivizing them to kill more Russians, let's be honest. Also, it's good for their morale. It's good for their motivation. And it's extremely adaptable because you can then change the point scores and say we want to kill drone operators or vehicles or logistics sites. So again, I think that's quite interesting.
Thank you very much. And by the way, I very much like your handle on your X account. It says, banned by Russia, decorated by Ukraine. It's quite we have already quite a good number of questions from the audience, and there one particularly to you, Mr. Foreman, on a completely different dimension of this conflict. According to point 17 in the leaked peace plan, the US and Russia will extend the 1991 START nuclear arms control treaty. It allows for 6,000 nuclear warheads for each from today's 1,500 each. That's New START. How do you assess this?
Well, I was glad the question of nuclear weapons came up in the last last session. Obviously, United Kingdom's a nuclear power. We're investing an awful lot of money in modernising our nuclear deterrent. The renuclearisation of British defence was a key principle of our strategic defence review. So we believe that nuclear weapons help ensure peace in Europe. And I was concerned, the fact that this New START is not START 1, as the document says, but the New START lapses in February and should be extended. But I think I'm more concerned about the whole architecture of post-Cold War arms control has collapsed. The intermediate nuclear forces, open skies, the New START, the testing by Russia and deployment of INF-busting range missiles, the deployment of nuclear weapons into Belarus, as discussed previously. So one of the consequences of Putin's aggression over the last decade or 15 years or so is the erosion of those arms control treaties. And irrespective of the situation in Ukraine, I think it's right for the permanent 5 members and the US and Russia in particular to sit down and talk about arms control. It shouldn't be beholden on the situation in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. So a more general question about the future, that may be a distant future. If we are to set up a new security architecture, first, who would be the party the signatories? Second, can we find a third party that supervises the architecture? And if so, who can take such a role of monitoring or even sanction the wrongdoings? You want to take this? Alexander, yeah.
First of all, may I just add a couple of words about this New START treaty? I don't think the Russians has been trying to use this strategic balance on strategic stability talks to get concessions from the Americans for decades. And I don't think that this administration would agree on that for the simple reason. One thing that there are 2 major powers like the United States and Russia. And now China is stepping up in this direction. So they're going to have 1,000 nuclear warheads and means to deliver in 5 years. So what is the reason for the United States to limit themselves with Russians while there is a rising threats from China? It's first thing. And second, as John rightly mentioned, that there is the other agreements that Russia violated. For example, INF Treaty that forbade the development of intermediate range missiles in Europe in general. And actually, the Russians has been violating. That's why the Trump administration withdrew from this treaty. Once again, there is no reason for Americans to negotiate it with Russians. Why? Once again, because of China. And China stockpiling this type of missiles with the aim to shift the balance into the Pacific. So that's why I don't think that the Trump administration would buy this thing and exchange it for Ukraine. About security architecture, once again, we cannot come up with the better ideas that we have. We have the UN Charter, Article 51, the right for self-defense, and NATO was based on that. And it's an open organization, and there is no way how to close doors for some nations over there. And we cannot invent anything else. And we cannot invite Russia to be part of this security architecture because their revisionist power, they want to break this status quo. Actually, Brezhnev agreed on that in 1975, and now the Russians are trying to redo that. So you cannot create something new with Russia, except to keep and to invest more into NATO. If there is no United States, and certainly they are going to withdraw in some time in the future from the European security, let's say, arrangements, Europeans need to take their security in their hands. There is an absolutely amazing report by IISS that Europe would need a decade and up to $1 trillion to substitute all those capabilities that the United States are providing NATO and Europe with. And certainly, since the Americans are not withdrawing in the quick pace, you have enough time and you have enough resources to build up genuinely European defenses. Thank you.
Anna, you wanted to.
Yeah, just to complement that, I think it's extremely important to separate between some kind of temporary structure that is part of a peace deal or peace agreement and the overall European security architecture. Those are two different things. And the overall security architecture rests on NATO and the EU, as I see it. Those are the prime security economic providers. And that is where Ukraine belongs as part of that, as a future. That path should be clear. Other countries as well, Moldova, for instance. And we need to work day and night to keep this together. That's our best bet going forward.
Ambassador Ildem.
Yes, I would like to echo what Anna has wisely said. There should be such a separation between the two. But at the same time, Europeans at NATO and in other forum should be able to reflect on the future security architecture of Europe. Usually, we tend to treat arms control and confidence building measures as a sort of a secondary domain, not give enough importance. But since whatever we are talking about, the ongoing war and how to bring an end to it is so much related to Europe's future security architecture, there should be a serious discussion started in European capitals so that we are prepared when time comes to have this component when a peace deal is reached to complement the efforts in that manner. But in any case, I would like to highlight once again that any peace deal should not be focused only in reaching a ceasefire, but it should be a sustainable one so that we want to face a situation in, let us say, 2 to 3 years, caught by surprise and confrontation to resume again.
Absolutely. You wanted to add something?
I think the last part of that question put the finger on the nub of the problem on the specific ceasefire verification. How do you verify and monitor ceasefire along a 1,000-kilometer front line when the OSCE couldn't really do it in the Donbass under the Minsk agreement? So who does it? It's not going to be the coalition are willing because they're not prepared to deploy their troops forward. It can't be nobody because Russia will just try and drive a coach and horses through any deal. So it'll have to be somebody from outside Europe trusted by both sides.
Very clear. There's another question which is fairly general, and I know it will be probably difficult to answer, but I think it reflects very well something we hear in our public opinions, I think all over Europe. With continuing Russian hybrid attacks in Europe and unrealistic peace terms for Ukraine, how can Europe step up and showcase unwavering support for Ukraine? When will Europe show that we are not afraid? Go ahead.
I'll start and just say, I think Europe is stepping up Europe with a small e, not the European Union, all of us, including those who are outside the European Union. And I had some figures here, actually, given to me by the Chief of Defence Staff, who just left, and said, since 2021, Europe is spending 770 billion euros, or dollars, more than it was. And then in the next 4 years, Europe will spend $1 trillion on defence collectively, and that Europe is now outspending the United States on defence for the first time. So that's quite good.
So why do people get this impression that we're never doing enough?
Because there's an awful lot of Euro doomsterism around, gloom and doom, that we can't do anything as Europeans, small e, without the Americans, which I think we are. Now, I think on the question is, we should be doing more on resilience. I think the bigger threat is the internal threat, rather than the external conventional nuclear threat from Russia. That's where we should be investing heavily, I think, as the ministers, as the president said, and making good on the 1.5% of GDP as promised at the NATO summit.
Anna?
Well, I also think that it's important to have broad conversations on these issues. We need to have much more public outreach, and I think political leadership on these issues that are difficult. Hybrid warfare, we just started talking about hybrid warfare. We talked about hybrid activities for a long time. Now the tone is getting sharper, but we still do not speak to the public, which usually thinks about other things like school or health, or why the bus didn't come this morning, or food is so expensive in the store, or but you don't win the votes by speaking about hybrid or defense or security. So there is a hurdle there at the political level, and a lot of countries, not the Nordic, Baltic, Polish, not where we are. I think there we have perhaps better system for it. But in many other European countries where I also travel a lot, you don't see these associations or forums or conversations ongoing. So that's also part of the long-term support and understanding how the security of Ukraine connects to the security. I was just in Madrid, for instance, earlier this week. It's a long way geographically, but we all share the same destiny. We all share the same destiny, and we need to understand that in this dangerous environment that Europe is navigating, we all need to realize where the threats are.
Ambassador Ildem, yeah.
Well, I think this requires lots of conversation, as Anna said. When we talk about societal resilience in fighting against hybrid threats, it requires buy-in of the societies, and it requires also perhaps comparing notes among ourselves, having best practices, because some countries are frontline countries having more experience in countering those hybrid threats. Now, a few words regarding the boosting of deterrence and defense. There was a discussion whether we call it strategic autonomy. I also don't like this expression. Maybe it is better
That was my question.
The qualification could be strategic responsibility. And since Europe tries to expand its capacity to produce capabilities, it should also be open-minded towards non-EU allies who can make a great contribution with their defense industrial capacity. But unfortunately, inclusivity is not taken as a given, but rather political obstructionism is in the game.
We have very little time for a short question, and I think it will be for you. It's a concrete question. Should NATO's highest level positions be re-evaluated and assigned to Eastern flank representatives as the US distances itself from Europe's comprehensive security?
Yeah, I don't think America is going to pull out of Europe. I don't think America will give up its leadership role in NATO. Irrespective of the sort of chatter, it's imperative to keep the Americans in and the Russians out. That means bringing, as the president said, unmatched military power and nuclear weapons. So I would say what we want is the status quo going forward, in particular on the role as Supreme Allied Commander. In terms of roles, you know, each nation gets flags, number of flags for a number of posts. I think that process has adapted to the presence of Finland and Sweden. So I think that's how it works. But any idea of giving up American role for a European leader, British or German, French, should be a non-starter.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's all we have, I'm afraid, but there are more panels and interesting discussions to come. So thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you.